Good morning, everyone.
Hello.
How is 9 a.m. treating you?
You don't have to feel bad about sitting far away. You can sit closer if you want, by the way, if you're interested.
Who's here because they didn't go to bed? Who's here because they really frickin' love frequency modulation? That's exciting.
Who's here because they don't know what this is?
Also-
Yes, we
also
love you as
exciting.
well. All right,
Okay.
good.
we're gonna make this real for you.
Let's break it down.
So, I have built a couple of synths here, and this panel, I'm going to talk about my tech, then Josh is going to talk about his, and Brandon is crashing the panel.
Does everybody
I'm
know
not- I
who's
don't
up
pull-
here? Let's do
Yeah.
some introductions.
So,
All right, Lewis, go.
my name is Soren, or Lewis. I build synths. I'm a post-bac electrical engineering student from the New York area. I occasionally make music also, but this is like most of my time goes into these things.
Nice. I'm Josh Welchel. I'm a composer for games, I guess that's what those are. I have a game called Masquerada coming out on PS4 and Steam this year. It's very exciting. Woohoo. No
He also
FM
worked
at
for
all.
Notch.
I guess I worked for Notch. I wrote music for Mojang's Scrolls. There's a little bit of FM in there. Woo.
Is there anything else that has FM that you would like
Yeah,
to shout
the
out
thing
that
that
you did?
the reason why I'm here is because I've built a rack extension called FM Blaster 16 for Reason, and it is a complete OPL3 emulator with the four ops, and then one of the really fun things I did with it was I've got all those GM patches from like Doom and Wolfenstein 3D, like just exported for it. So it's pretty cool. I'll talk about that later.
And it's written in Python.
Woo.
Just a heads up, which is awesome. I'm Brendan Becker, or Mr. MAGFest, or Inverse Phase, or whatever the fuck my name is. I don't even know.
Good
I
introduction,
don't.
man.
It's like 9 a.m. I just don't even. I'm crashing the panel predominantly because I won't hear from Josh ever again after this.
They
but-
both suffer from the same problem.
But I am releasing at the end of the month, or by the end of the month, an original game soundtrack written completely on the Sega Genesis or Mega Drive if for some reason you don't live here. And I really just dove in to FM when I went to work on that and started trying to come up with interesting patches and instruments and whatever. So you'll hear kind of a beginner's view from me on, like, what are you getting into, what are you learning, what are the pitfalls that stopped me from, being better at FM, stuff like that, I guess.
Yeah, just to kind of get a gauge of experience, who here does, or who here knows what FM is and what we're talking about? Okay, cool. Nice.
That is what we're talking
Yeah,
about.
that's the one, not the radio. Which, same words, I guess.
It's actually funny
It's
because
actually the same concept even.
it's
but-
actually funny because FM synthesis does not use frequency modulation at all. It uses phase modulation, and it should be called PM synthesis. But due to Yamaha marketing reasons, they called it FM.
Cool. Who here started playing games on the Sega Genesis or had that console? Cool. So that has an FM chip in it. You guys know that, right? And then who here played like Doom and Blake Stone and games on the PC with the AdLib? Cool, yeah. That's how I got into it. So actually, interesting fact about that chip and the way it works is there is an OPL chip on all these AdLib cards, and there's a lot of generations of them. But what they did was they only wrote general MIDI with the 128 standard instruments and the percussion track. And they would go and make banks of sounds by defining the FM instruments that corresponded to each general MIDI instrument. So just a fun little fact, you can actually go into like a Doom WAD and see this thing called genmidi.imf. That's all the instrument definitions. And you can swap it with another games like Commander Keen, and it just gets really silly. So, fun facts.
So this synth has 2 OPL3s, 2 Adlib Sound Blaster FM chips. This synth has 4 Sega Genesises.
They're going to be really
Oh,
fun when
and
we listen to them.
Yeah.
More shout outs for old FM chips. We might as well do them.
Okay.
There's the OPL-L, which is the low-cost version of the OPL2 and OPL3. That was in the old Sega Master System and the upgraded MSX2s.
Which I have not
predominantly.
used.
That's the YM2413. A lot of people might be familiar with the YM2151, which was in the mid-'80s to like early '90s arcade games with FM. Very, very famous for Atari System 1618 games, like Paperboy is a good example, or like Marble Madness. That era of arcade machine that had that really like overdriven FM synthesis sound. Atari was known for that. And like a lot of early Konami arcade games, YM2151 is in Street Fighter 2, and then it kind of started to taper off.
I'm so impressed right now.
What?
You
There's-
just boom, all the models.
What, the 2612 is in the
This is
Genesis?
what
That's
he
the
does for the
OPM2. This is what I do for a living, so like this is stuff that I actually know. Not how those chips work is a completely different story, but I can tell you all about where they are and where they appear. The 2612 in the Genesis that Lewis was purporting, there's the YM2608, which is the OPN-A, which was in the PC-88 Soundboard 2 and a couple other things. Reason you might want to know what that is because that's what Yuzo wrote Streets of Rage 2 music on. And I guess and Streets of Rage and probably some other stuff.
And then there's the Genesis port of Streets of Rage, which is the version
Right.
that most of us know.
And the chips are roughly compatible and don't have, many differences. And then there's the OPN-1, which is the YM2203, which was on the Soundboard 1 in that same computer, and a bunch of other like, if you ever get a copy, does anyone here play YS? YS? Ah, nobody. Go play that game. It's like one of Yuzo's first works. Well, maybe not one of, but like, it kind of is with Falcom. But if you ever listen to the like CD soundtrack that they put out in Japan, like it's this really simple, basic FM that doesn't even sound like it sounds like it's on a crappy Casio keyboard. And kind of a lot of FM does, but that's a good one to know. I'm going to stop
should we
rambling
get
now.
into
You
it?
can, yeah, you
All right.
want to show off some things?
Can everybody see what he's got up here? At least like remotely.
You can see the backs of it. There will be pictures. So like when I do an audio demo of this synth,
But does everybody understand
Well,
what he's got?
There's a picture of it on the.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
so-
Sweet
so-
deal.
Yeah.
All right.
You can look at that and
these-
see
these-
what he's
these
looking
synths-
at.
I'll just give a very brief introduction and get into some music. These synths are from the MIDIBox platform. So if you go to midibox.org, I've actually seen 2 people here already who have built other MIDIBox synths. So nice to be in the family. Basically, I got the operating system from them. I got some of the hardware, and then I designed other of the hardware. Sorry to see you go. And yeah, so anyway, so let's play some music. So Josh was talking about GM instruments. I've made almost a complete GM patch bank for this synthesizer out of 2 operator voices. So it will do automatic loading, and I hope this works. Oh, no, it won't work. Hold on a second. Here we are. Let's just say that that was supposed to happen.
And that's the end.
That's the end of
And
that
then
demo.
it loops.
All right. So you get the idea. Hope you recognize that. Now I will show the other one. Josh, if you may.
What would you like to see it?
Yes. So
This synthesizer is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. First of all,
that's
it's
a lie. You're
got
supposed to say that about your girlfriend.
Football.
no, I don't know. She doesn't
So
have.
you actually weren't supposed to see the picture of it with all the lights on. You were supposed to actually see it first live with all the lights on.
I see it here.
bad.
That's too bad.
So
Go. It's your baby, man. I
all right.
can't explain it like you can. You have the magic.
no, I'm just going to start it up, and I want you to see something. So get over here. So the story with this is I built this synth for him on commission, and he hasn't seen it until the last 10 minutes ago. So let's see. This might be too loud. All right. You all know this song? Good ending from Streets of Rage 2. Thank you.
It doesn't matter what it sounds like. It just matters that it's really, really shiny and looks cool all the time.
That was also not supposed to happen.
And then the song loops.
Yeah, all right. So evidently, Audacity is just stopping recording after less than a minute. So that's great. Oh well. Well, this is kind of a hack job with our panel here, but oh well.
Put this on monitor mode, right?
Maybe. Yes. Yeah. Okay. All right. So this synth is called MIDI Box Quad Genesis. It has 4 Sega Genesis worth of sound chips, meaning 4 YM2612s and 4 SN76489, which is the like square wave and noise sound chip.
The Sega Master System sound.
Yeah, so 4 Genesises, 4 Master Systems. Right now, it just has a test program that will play a VGM file, streaming it from this SD card, and also do the visualization thing that actually serves the purpose of also being a test for all the LEDs. There are 638 LEDs on the front panel here. I soldered all of that by hand. I really love Josh.
I can't. The amount of work he managed to do to get this here today is ridiculous.
And it's not perfect. There's a couple little issues with it, but that's besides the point. All right, so let's talk about FM. I promise the math won't be that bad. You can leave also. Please don't. So everybody knows what a sine wave is. In analog audio, the output that we're talking about is a varying voltage over time. 0 volts is like the midline, so that's why it's V equals sine of t. We can also represent this as sine of a phase. So like sine is a periodic function, so after one cycle, it just keeps repeating. But a phase variable is just like the same thing, except like you're thinking about that within the space of one loop of the sine wave rather than, you know, t equals 3,000 seconds when you've had the synthesizer on for 3,000 seconds. So with most synths, additive or subtractive synths or FM or anything like that, you can add an envelope to your waveform, which just gets multiplied. E of t would be, let's say, bum, or from your perspective, you know, that would be a graph that rises sharply and then decays over time. I'm assuming everyone has a vague idea of what that is like.
I know what a bong is like. I'm the comic relief guy.
And yeah, so phi, there's a factor of 2 pi because sine goes from 0 to 2 pi and not 0 to 1, but don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. So, well, I mean, if you're...
Don't worry about that is the theme of FM.
So frequency modulation means you're modulating the frequency parameter to the sine wave. All of FM chips, basically all FM chips, certainly all of them from Yamaha, every one that you've ever seen, actually use phase modulation, and that means you're adding a value, what I call x here, to the t in order to make your phi. So what's inside the sine is not just constant t, but t plus some other x, which is variable. And the simplest case is where x is another sine wave with a different phase variable theta and with a different amplitude f instead of e. So the result is this mess, where you have amplitude times sine of something which has t plus another amplitude times sine. So it's a sine within a sine. What does this do? Well, if you just have sine of t, your sine wave is just going along nice and uniform. But if you have sine of time plus a phase, that means you can think about it as time is going along uniformly, but you're also a little bit ahead or a little bit behind that. So it's as if time is actually going kind of like this through your sine wave. And so you could imagine that the value kind of does this, and then if you graph that, you get some more complex waveform. And you actually not only get a single harmonic at the subfrequency, but you get a Bessel function, you get a whole bunch of harmonics, and that's what makes the things that we're used to.
Are there any engineers or programmers in here? All right, cool. That makes a lot
All
of
right.
sense.
So
I still have to tailor it to everyone, not
did,
just the
did people
engineers.
get that, or I have a slightly dumber way to say that if anyone wants me to give it a go? Okay. All right. So have you ever used one of the graphing calculators and typed in, an equation, and you've been in class and whatever, and you're using the trace function because you need to figure out where on the specific wave a certain number gets graphed as, right? And you can go backwards and forwards. Basically, what Lewis is saying is you can walk through time as you're playing. Like, you can walk through the recording by using the math and just changing the number value. Does that?
Reason here? Awesome, you guys.
They all use Sonar. And FL Studio. Does my explanation sort of help a little bit? It's if you just start at 0 and you start iterating through values and adding 0.01, 0.01, 0.01, whatever, then basically you can slowly draw the sound wave.
So I have a hands-on example in just a second. So just to be clear inside what's going on inside the sound chip, this is just a reflection. This is actually a picture from one of the data sheets from one of these sound chips, and it's a reflection of this directly. This is the inner wave and the outer one, and the sine is the sine. The EG is the E or the F. PG is the part that's creating the phase value within the sine. So anyway, that's what it looks like. This is two operators, one modulating the next. And one more thing is that you can also put in a harmonic. So instead of 2 pi times t, it's 2 pi times nt. So it'll be that much faster. That is some harmonic of the original waveform. And you can do that for both of them, N and M. And so this is the final equation for basically the final equation for a 2-operator FM voice. And you have 4 parameters: N, M, the harmonics of both waves, and the envelopes of both waves, including the overall volume. So if we can start this up again, what happened? This isn't a Mac, buddy. It is not doing anything.
Mighty Apple has decided us.
Can you plug the synthesizer directly into the soundboard?
No. Give us a second. Right. What can I skip to while this is rebooting?
Let's just ask for a random question from the audience.
Hey, that's a good idea.
Yeah, questions.
Up to so far, does anyone have a question
Yes.
about what?
So
there
that's
is
a good
Yamaha
question.
stock.
Yeah, I believe there is new stock for some of these chips. The PSGs in here are, I thought they were fake, the ones that I got, because they were labeled with a date code of 2014. That may mean that they are fake. They do work, so all right, but that's not quite the FM chip. Basically, no, nobody is not only not making FM chips anymore, nobody is using FM anymore. The people who in the synth head world who probably used to be in FM now are probably in granular synthesis, but we think FM is still cool. What is going
Yep.
on here?
There are a bunch of like eBay stores with supposed clones, and they may or may not be real. So make sure that you have an application to put the chip into to test it before you actually order the chip. Don't build your application around, around a chip and then order another one to go in its place. But or just make sure the ordering happens second, basically. But China, you'll find that China can copy a lot of things and do a pretty amazing job at it. So you might be able to find newly made bootleg chips, so to speak, that actually work and do everything you need to do.
Sorry, the technical difficulties don't seem to be going away.
What's the input from
We tried this. It's a yeah. This was no, it's not connected to the mixer because this is what they gave us, and we only had one possible way of getting that into here, and it wasn't working.
Does anybody have a MacBook or a laptop?
That's not gonna be able to
No,
Yeah, no, not to plug it
this
in.
is just to get audio in.
Oh, because you need the.
Oh, do you want to just throw that back at me?
Let's try it again. Sorry, give us a second here. Apologize.
That's good. It's good progress.
It's just constantly making the Mac chime.
Well, to be fair, this laptop is from 2010 and was run over. It wasn't mine at the time. It was my
It might
buddy's.
finally
He
be
gave it to
giving up.
me after it was dead.
What exactly is the next thing to be shown off?
Well, I need that in order to get audio out of this, and it was going to show up.
I mean, do you want to try?
This is not good. I literally did not know Macs could just beep at you.
Beep OS. Come on.
All right, this is borked.
I had a very similar thing happen to my laptop this morning.
It must be.
All right.
Well,
Do you want me? Do you want to finish?
hey, this sounds like it's working. Maybe.
I believe in this.
Nah.
While we're getting set up, just, I think, does anybody have any questions about like the fundamental way frequency modulation works? I know that we explained it with some equations and with the example of running through a sample. Do you guys understand? Is anybody into like granular synthesis or wavetable synthesis? Does anybody know what those words mean? So when you're looking at something like wavetable synthesis, which is actually how the emulators will implement frequency modulation a little bit, is you take a recording of an idea, maybe a sine wave or any of the waves that you'll have, like the triangle, etc. And you'll have a wave table in memory. It's just if y is this, the value of whatever formula I'm going to be is this, so the chip doesn't actually have to necessarily do all the math every time. And what we're doing is we're playing through that table in time, and so the modulation comes by sort of like a scratch of time. If you imagine like a turntable, you scratch it, imagine that the disc is time itself. That's frequency modulation.
Another good thing to maybe talk about is how the modulation actually occurs. There are a bunch of different configurations and ways that you can modify the sound. We just talked about a 2-operator wave, where we're basically trying to where we're basically trying to modulate one sine wave with another wave, and so, the terms that people might recognize, there's overtoning, which means that you can actually just create two waves and see how they affect each other or how they mix together or apart, so to speak. And then you can also use okay. Keep talking. That's my job. Okay. Well, yeah, I was gonna say I did that until 6:30 a.m., so I'll be fine. So another thing is if you think of the wave as an actual literal function, where the bottom of the wave is 0 or a negative value or whatever, and the top is 100% or a positive value, you can just take that value, and instead of just mixing the waves together, like if you're at a sound mixing station type thing, you could say take that value and treat it as a vibrato value, like to vibrate the frequency of the sound wave, or to
I'm holding wires
vibrate
together.
the amplitude in the form of tremolo. So you can basically just use one of the sine waves as a value to modify some component of the other sound wave.
All right, can you hold these wires together for me?
Hold the wires together. That is incredible.
All right. Thank you.
Please touch the things
You know,
together.
part of engineering is solving problems the wrong way. All right, so that's a sine wave. Let me just zero out that. And there should be one modulation connection here. Just 1 second, EG1 to 2. There we go. All right, so that's... There's a sine wave, right? So, whatever. Middle C. So this is actually a drum right now, but I deconstructed it. So here's our FM. So this is the first sine wave, and now I'm going to start adding in modulation. Just the second sine wave, the inner one, doesn't have any envelope. I'm just going to turn up its volume. Oh wait, it had an envelope. Hold on. So that's like FM from nothing to full. And then usually you don't run it at like full. You find somewhere along the way. That's a sine wave modulating a sine wave. And now this is going up the harmonics of the inner wave. Your wires are. So it's going up. You can hear how there's like more and more higher frequencies. And now going up the harmonics of the carrier, the outer one. So you get the higher frequencies, but you lose the lower frequencies. So now what we can do is we can introduce an envelope on the inner waveform. So it goes away. And now the overall sound doesn't have an envelope. It's still a sine wave, a constant volume, but the modulation goes away. And that's actually very similar to how a lot of real instruments work. When you have like a pluck a guitar string or something like that, at first there's a lot of like, the string is very fast, just like whacking around because you plucked it in a violent way. But as time goes on, it settles back down.
I had a moment like that once.
Sorry?
Where my string was just waving away wildly because someone plucked it.
Well, if you like slow down time and look at it really,
Yeah.
With a strobe or something.
If you slow down time, it probably looks like dick spin. Yeah.
So now I'm going to turn up the...
Who does not know what ADSR stands for?
And then
Well, I asked who does not know what ADSR stands for. attack, decay, sustain, release. So basically, that's the idea of an envelope. So you can choose how the note attacks, decays, and holds, and then goes away.
So by influencing the formula with the envelope, that's how you get the distinct sound. He deconstructed a bass drum. The way he did it was by removing.
Well, I just turned off everything making the bass drum so that I could, because otherwise I need my laptop to produce the MIDI files. And actually, I'm going to have harder time with the later demos without having a laptop. I might work on this while other people are talking.
In terms of reconstructing the bass drum that he just deconstructed, a bass drum is actually a very simple.
So we're talking about sine waves here, but there's no reason that the waveform has to be a sine wave. And in fact, the OPL3 has 8 choices. All of them, the first 6 are derived from the sine wave, as you can see. Wave shape number 6, which is the 7th one, is just a square wave, which is, well, let me demonstrate them all. Good question. The FM synthesis chips use a variety of bit widths internally, like 11, 20, like whatever they need. This really isn't any particular bit, it's FM. When people say 8-bit, they usually mean stuff from like the NES era that has square waves and noise and that kind of stuff. And when people say 16-bit, they usually mean Super Nintendo samples and stuff. And this is sort of in between in terms of generations, but in terms of like actual hardware, it's really not related.
I'm going to add to that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Lewis is saying that the colloquial way to refer to bits of sound is most people use the era of the control system, which is the NES is 8-bit, and so they call NES sound 8-bit sound, but the NES sound is actually 4-bit, because the real way to refer to sound in terms of bits is how much amplitude depth you have. Which is to say, on the NES, the reason the sound is 4-bit is you have 16 choices of amplitude, which is 4 bits. And if you've ever looked at a CD player, like especially one of the older ones, they'll say like 20-bit oversampling or whatever on them, or I mean there are a bunch of things, but basically a CD is 16-bit. Which means you get 536 different choices that the speaker can be in, and 20-bit oversampling. What is 20 bits anyway? Multiply that times 8. What is 20 bits anyway? That would be a great chip tune. So 1048576 then. 20-bit sound would be 1,000,000 speaker choices instead of the 65,000, which would be 16-bit, instead of 256, which would be 8-bit. It's that is how you define how many bits a sound is in terms of tech spec. So to jump and tie this back into FM, a good example is the Sega Genesis. Usually the YM2612 gets paired with which DAC? Can you rattle off the model number?
It has a DAC inside. It just outputs analog. Yeah.
Depending on the 2612 you have.
No, all YM2612s.
Oh, all 2612s have
Yeah.
Okay. So,
Sorry.
well, there's actually a model number attached to it, but I guess they put them on the same ceramic,
No,
so it doesn't matter.
That is the that is the model number. Anyway, whatever.
So the Sega Genesis,
Internally,
the DAC,
internally,
the internal
the DAC
is
10-bit. 9-bit.
9-bit?
Yes. I have looked at the die. I have a picture of it later.
Oh no! Wait. Okay. So the DAC is 9-bit, but the sound it can generate is 10-bit, and there's a possibility of an overflow. Does anyone know how clipping works? Does anyone know the difference between digital and analog clipping? So normally, when you turn something up too loud, the waveform kind of just starts flattening against the extremes. Like you'll see your speaker just kind of go to the extremes,
and go up anymore,
so it just flattens the waveform or whatever. That's called analog clipping. But digital clipping is when you get a numerical overflow. Does anyone remember collecting coins in a game and it rolls over from 255 to 0 or something like that? So that can happen in sound, and when you're trying to generate sound on a 10-bit accumulator in the 2612, you can generate a number that is too high for the DAC to convert, and it will just overflow and convert it back to a low number instead. And what you end up with, instead of just a flattened sound, which kind of doesn't really honestly sound that bad if you don't push it too hard, is you end up with crackle and pop, and I guess maybe some snap. Since that's my morning breakfast joke. But you'll end up with basically crunchy sounds happening when sound gets too loud, rather than just kind of like the equivalent of what happens on a microphone, where you get closer. That. So digital clipping happens on FM chips, and analog clipping happens on analog gear, or just when you're mixing or mastering.
All right, I'm just setting up for the next song. So you can do different waveforms, as I was actually just sine wave. This is the next one on the chart. Next one, next one, next one, next one, square wave, and sort of saw wave, long story. And then also, you can do, on this chip, you can combine pairs of 2 operator voices into 4 operator voices, which means the same thing, but you can nest sine within sine within sine 4 times. These are the 4 algorithms that you can do, and you can see some of them are not just nested, but adding the outputs of sines together. And the Genesis chip here has 8 algorithms. It only does 4 operator FM synthesis. So that was the demo I just did. So yes, so now I'm going to talk about a sound, a very specific sound that I made by accident, because that's how the best ones happen. Percussion, blah, blah, blah.
Accidents in FM are the best kind of things.
All right, so let's just reset this. So what I did is, one second here. All right, so this is like a sort of normal, I need you. There we go. This is sort of a normal FM kind of sound. It's a little low. Right, there we go. So what I did is I first replaced the sine waves with square waves. So that's a square wave FMing a square wave. Then I set the EGs to 1, so they're not EGs anymore. Come on.
No envelope. The EG is the envelope generator.
Yep. And then I add in an LFO here.
And suddenly you've got techno.
In fact, so, and then... Do you know what's coming? So let's hope I got everything configured right. Otherwise, this will be a little anticlimactic. Hold on a second.
It's got the story, but you don't know the same thing.
That, don't say anything.
I think it's Rick Astley.
So the lead sound there is the one I was just making. And I'm actually going to play with it as this is going.
able to control it like that, that's something that, anything else have something that cool?
Yeah, I mean, soft synths generally have that kind of stuff, but it's.
I'll show you what it looks like in a second.
Yeah, okay. So, what else we got here? So, this is the YM2612, which is the chip from the Genesis. 4 of them are in here. Over last semester, I did some hacking work with it. Yeah, you can rest your hands for a minute. The other pictures there are small pieces of the die. So this is an image of the actual chip surface, which I then drew colored lines on by eye to represent different kinds of signals. The table on the left is actually the table that determines what register you're writing to or which register group you're writing to. And the table on the part on the right, the lower part is the top of the operator unit, if you know what that is. And this is the bottom of the like accumulator DAC portion. So the upshot is I actually found some stuff. I personally found 5 bits in test registers. There were 2 test registers known, but some of the bits weren't known. I found 5 of those bits and figured out what they do. One of them will be useful in this synth, which will let me read back values from the operators and let me show a VU meter kind of thing. But I'm going to show off a different bit, which I didn't discover. Somebody else discovered by accident because their audio driver was buggy and writing values to this chip in a register which didn't exist, and it evidently did exist. So imagine we take a sine wave, and if anyone with any programming or engineering background will understand that this is represented by a digital number. And now think about what would happen if you just invert the most significant bit of the sine wave. Now, if that looks like a bad Photoshop job, that is because that is what it is. It is also because that is what it sounds like. So,
You ever heard Photoshop referred to as Photochop? It's kind of like that.
so let's pick a good song for this. All right, that's as good as any. That doesn't sound so good. Oh, let's try this. No, it's either yellow or white. Sorry, 1 second here. You get the idea, right? So do you all know this piece from Streets of Rage? Do you remember it? Maybe something a little bit more familiar. Sonic 2, anybody? All right, so I have this mapped out to the button here. And in just a second, I'm going to press the button, and it's going to set this bit.
This is like the SNL skit where they're like, where's the cup?
So that's normal. It's actually mapped to a button on the front panel that is labeled ugly. This is literally the ugly button. Let me just load up a different VGM here. That might be a
You're
little
not
bit
going to say
more-
you're pushing it to the limit?
So it's sort of like limiting because it uses the full spectra, like the full waveform for any sound. Imagine if you have a very quiet sine wave that becomes just like right. So this is a favorite. There's some better ones though.
Also, just very useful if you wanted to use this as like a distorted instrument. Like that's an actual application of this.
Yeah, the
I mean,
unfortunate part is it's global for the whole chip.
right. So
So-
you would need to use the machine as the instrument.
It sounds a little better when it's not a reverby room, but oh well. So that was that demo, and yeah, I can show one more song on here if you like, and then we can move on to Josh. It's your public profile picture. I'm sorry, buddy.
This is me, man. Don't judge me.
He used to be emo because, you know, he lived in California for so long.
That picture is like a year old. All right, so I will mention one more thing as I'm playing this last song. Every time I play a MIDI on this, it's pretty great. I don't have to like load any patches, but what I do have to do is there's two OPL3s. Each one has 18 voices, so I have 36 voices at my disposal. I guess I just kind of say bye-bye to the mic here. The point is, it doesn't automatically allocate voices. So if you get like 5 notes on MIDI channel 3, and all of a sudden those notes turn off, but then you get 5 notes on MIDI channel 5, it doesn't say, oh, let's switch over the voices. Now these voices are in middle channel 5, and let's play the sounds on there. So I have to actually, when I make an arrangement, I have to notate in the MIDI file how many voices I need on each channel. And sometimes I don't remember to do that, like for this file, so I have to guess. But that's okay. So what I have to do when I start it up is select each channel, hold it down. This is trumpet, so I'm going to hit 3 voices to select that. Next MIDI channel is trombones. I'm going to select 2 of them. Same idea. You get the idea. So that just takes me a moment. And for the Sandstorm demo, it was a little more complex because I don't have patches saved that have like velocity sensitivity in the drums, which I needed for that in order to have the snare drum like. So yeah, give me 1 second. This is not technical difficulties. This is just how my synth works. This synth, I guess I can say this while I'm working on this here. This Genesis synth is based on streaming and playing back little bits of VGM files. That's why there's like a VGM player is like the demo for it. So let's say you can take a VGM file from Sonic and you can just like cut it until you get like a very small portion of it, and then you can like extract an instrument from that, and then assign that to a keyboard and play that instrument down the keyboard. That could be like the ring sound effect or anything that's been played on the sound chip.
Perhaps an interesting thing to note is that all of the MIDI configuration hardware that Lewis is talking about is on the MIDI side, and that the actual chip itself does not speak MIDI.
Yeah, that's why there's a synth, and you can't just plug in MIDI into the sound chip.
For example, the 2612 has 6 channels of FM, and when you signal it, you just say, this sound, this channel, and you get 1 note to play on that channel.
Yeah, you don't even say this sound. You say this register, this
Well,
value,
yeah.
which corresponds to a
This
knob.
patch.
Yeah.
It's not so simple, Brendan. You can't just break it down into one simple step, man.
I think we all just sort of duck-faced at each other.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. So Lewis, is there a chance that we might be able to take these to Jam Space?
Today?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a chance, depending on schedule and stuff.
For these lovely people as well.
Oh, meaning you're not going to be there.
No, I'm going.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yes, absolutely.
That'd be amazing. So I asked everybody earlier, does anybody nobody uses Reason here? Awesome. Because the thing that I built is a Reason rack extension. Awesome. It doesn't matter anyway, my computer's totally fried, but basically what I've done is I've taken the chip that you would see on the ad-lib, basically, the OPL2 and the OPL3, and the one that we just listened to, and I've emulated it in software, very similar to how, does anybody have DOSBox? They have a pretty good emulator in there too, as far as what we can really do with software and what we know about the chip. But I've built that with 4 operators.
Yeah.
I've done that with 4 operators and just made an extension where, very similar to how he's just grabbing knobs and tweaking them, and Reason, you can also just assign those, just like a VST, you can automate everything. So it's pretty straightforward. Looking at that is much cooler than looking at what I've done because it's real.
I mean, yours is real also. It's not
I mean,
hardware,
it's not
but...
something you can touch and stroke, so it's not. So Brendan wanted to show some stuff, and I think it's...
Don't let Tumblr get on that. Josh Welchel cross Minibox Quad Genesis confirmed.
Guess that works. Can do all the things appear on the, hey, there we go.
Do you have audio too?
I will, I think.
Maybe it'll work better for you than for us. So what are we looking at? What's this program?
So this is another way to write FM, which is without MIDI at all, and I prefer this method because although MIDI is very popular among musicians and designed for them, and probably 90% of musicians use MIDI, I don't know, maybe 80%, because there are people out there that just don't even, they just record their instruments and they're done. But that's not the point. The point is, trackers are another popular way to sequence music.
Is this familiar?
Got a couple tracker. Wow. Okay, so this is relevant. So in here we're in 2612 mode Genesis, but since Genesis mode in Devil Mask also has 4 PSG channels for the Sega Master System. That's crammed up the ass
As
of
the Sega Genesis itself has.
Right. So you can see my crappy patch names like Thick Sauce, Seinfeld, and Bass in Your Space, and Hardcore Bass Drum Fucked. But everyone in here is above 18, right? So we'll go with that. Great. You definitely are. But so what I've done, and what I thought people would find interesting is, one, just maybe play some stuff on the Genesis that I've written, and also show you how you mess with your patches and instruments in here to get interesting sounds. Possibly even, do people know how to create a patch at all in FM? Or is that part of the reason that some people are here?
Well, that's what the panel just covered, right?
Well, that's how you covered how to do it with knobs. But when you mentioned you might also, in software synthesizers, be presented with a whole bunch of knobs in a slightly less intuitive format, I actually find this more intuitive, but it's confusing as fuck because you don't know what any of this shit means, basically. And so the first time I tried to write FM, I had no idea what I was looking at. I was like, okay, FMS, AMS, TL, what does any of this stuff mean? And it's basically the random crap that Yamaha threw in the documentation for all of the chips, everything is an abbreviation. So, when Lewis was talking about what were you, when you were talking about, what did you call the multiplier?
Harmonic?
Harmonics, yes.
On
but
this? On this synth, it's called F-Mult, and on this synth,
Yeah.
it's called harmonic.
Okay,
But I changed
so-
names. Like what you say, AMS and FMS, that's LFO frequency depth and LFO amplitude depth.
Right. So, like FMS is basically, like how much frequency. Like FMS is basically vibrato, and AMS is basically tremolo. If you really want to dumb it down, on the 2612, and then FB is how much feedback, which is kind of a cool thing where you can throw a kink in the wave.
I didn't cover that.
Yeah, and like alg is which algorithm, because you can also choose how these are tied together and how they affect each other, so you can see how the little green thing is changing. You can, right? Yeah. Okay. So that is how each of the operators will be tied together to like create a different sound, or one will overtone the other ahead of time, or vibrate that and then overtone this or whatever. And usually this little loopback thing means that's the one with the feedback algorithm going on it. And if feedback is turned down to 0, then it just doesn't matter. There's no feedback, so it's a normal operator. But breaking down the operator parameters, since I had to figure this out, and apparently there's very few places that you can actually Google what this stands for. And it's also just not easy to Google like a bunch of random abbreviations. Mult is your multiplier or your harmonic. DT is detune, which is just basically if you want it to be just slightly off. TL stands for total level, which is completely an unintuitive word, but makes sense because each of your operators have total level, but you can just think of it as volume if you would really like to.
The reason they didn't call it volume is because when the waveform is a modulator rather than a carrier, it's the degree of modulation. Like the first thing I played where I had the sine wave and then I went, right? That's
How much
changing
modulation?
total level, but it's not changing volume. So that's why they called it that.
And the other thing is as you modulate the wave and change it and twist it and do various crazy things to it, the sound is going to sound louder or quieter, and that will be even without tweaking the total level at all. So volume is really a bad word, but it's something that you might think of in your head while you're working with that. And then before we mentioned ADSR, and that's what the rest of these are. You have AR, which is attack region, DR,
Attack
decay
rate.
region, D2R, because you have a second decay region, SL, which is sustain level, and then RR, which is your release region, and RS, which is release sustain, which means when you let off the key.
It's actually rate scaling, not
Is
really
it rate scaling?
Yeah,
This
has a sustain mode. This one doesn't have a sustain mode.
Oh,
It's rate
so
scale.
on the Genesis, it works as a release sustain. Doesn't it?
No, it's rate scale.
That's how I've been. And when you tweak it, it actually affects the. Oh well.
It's
this
whether
is not
it's the
Okay.
it's
All
the
right, I
degree.
stand corrected.
It's the degree to which. So on an actual instrument, if you think about a guitar or whatever, or like if you think about a guitar playing a high note, not just like an acoustic guitar, versus an electric bass playing a low note. The acoustic guitar plays a high note, it goes away really quickly. It goes bing and goes away. The bass playing a low note, or even the same guitar playing a low note, it's like bow, right? So that means the envelope is slower. So that could be the same guitar patch. You don't have to change parameters. If you set up that, whatever it's called, SR, it gives you 4 choices of how much you want the envelope to go quicker as the frequency goes up.
Yeah, I like the term keyboard scaling for that.
Yes.
Because it
Yeah.
implies where on the keyboard you are and what the envelope is going to do.
So we learned a thing, including me. When you mess with in this, when you mess with your rate, right? Here's the rate scale thing. Oh, and it's not moving because I don't know why it isn't. Anyway, it does something in the release region, and that's why I assumed it was that, because I couldn't find that one.
It's probably just triggering the envelope change differently.
Yeah, or something. So, and then there's this SSGEG thing, which
that's-
basically
that's
is,
fun.
It's a fun Genesis thing, and we learned earlier that EG stands for envelope generator. You can generate an envelope to loop one of your operators, and you have to turn it on down here, right? So you have an operator that's already generating a certain type of tone, and you can loop the way the operator works to basically get it to do stuff. And in a specific case, actually, I should load a different song. Let's load.
It's a part of the very old non-FM chips that was added to these particular line, the OPN line of FM chips, to provide some sort of backwards compatibility, and then it was removed from the documentation from the later ones, including the
Are you
one that was
talking
in the
about
Genesis.
just SSG?
Yeah,
Because
just
that's not what
SSG.
SSG EG is.
It is. It's
Well, right, but there's the difference of SSG features in a chip, and then there's SSG features applied to.
Are you
the
talking
envelope.
about channel 3 having 4 different frequencies?
No, channel 3 you can
That's a different
separate.
thing.
You're talking
Alright,
about
whatever.
channel
I'll
3.
just shut up and let you finish.
Okay. SSG is Yamaha's word for PSG, which is basically the Sega Master System that's crammed up the ass of the Genesis. It's really the way it is. But SSG EG allows you to use that SSG to generate an envelope for FM.
Yes, that's correct.
And so, but that's why I'm saying there are FM chips with just SSG in them.
Yes, that
And
is also
so-
correct.
So you should definitely separate in your mind SSG from SSG EG, because SSG will create tones, and SSG EG will modify your waveform further on FM.
Yeah, it's just sort of like an undocumented feature. Long story.
So one of the things that I used it for was to I wanted to do some interesting weird stuff with Genesis, and I decided I would learn to make Sega Genesis dubstep wobbles. And make wubs. And honestly, if you've ever actually looked up a tutorial on like how to, I don't care about you authentication. If you've ever looked up a tutorial on how to dubstep on YouTube or whatever, you'll actually find people with, like FM stuff, and they'll be like, oh, well, the idea of bass wobbles is based on FM, and here is how you configure your FM operators to get the bass wobble. The thing is they're all using like brand new plugins that support 6, 8, 12 operators or whatever, and the Sega Genesis and also the OPL3 have 4 operators. So if you backport what they're saying into this like lesser chip, you don't really end up with the same sound. In fact, it doesn't really sound that great at all. And
Hit play.
You can make up for that by using this SSG EG thing to effectively kind of create a 5th operator, so to speak, that modifies your, whichever operators you associate it with. So this is my Sega Genesis dubstep wobble. So Josh just really wants me to play this track, so I'm going to actually skip slightly forward in the track, so I'm not time monopolizing here because the panel is actually already over. This is the part that no one cares about in dubstep. You hear that crackle when my snare hits sometimes? That's the digital clipping that I was talking about. It's an old version of the track.
I need an adult.
So that's an example of Sega Genestep, or sometimes I just call it fart step because Josh said that I should maybe mention how the sample channel works, or maybe even just mention that it exists, because it's not a thing you think about. We just finished talking about like beep boop PSG chiptune type stuff, and then FM. But on the Sega Genesis, you can reconfigure channel 6 as to replay PCM. And that's how you get, you know, pretty much all drum sounds in all games, but not as much in FM as, you know, other stuff. But any recorded drum will replay on there. So you know, like I've got my my voice sample. I need an adult drop or whatever. But like, that's a nice hearty gush. And I think, that's all that's in this specific track. But I wanted to mention a couple other cool, fun tricks that I'll let you know, industry secrets that I just learned a couple months ago. You might remember that I mentioned the feedback thing where you can pinch the sound wave more or less. And one thing that you can't really do very easily on the Genesis is, did your slide include the lack of sawtooth on the 2612?
I did not talk about this.
Okay. So the Genesis, see you later, Andy. So the Genesis has different waveform choices from the OPL3, and one of them is the OPL3 has a sawtooth, and the Genesis kind of doesn't.
So actually, the Genesis has exactly one waveform choice. It's a
Yes.
sine wave.
You
The
only have sines.
The OPL3 has 8 waveforms. None of them are a sawtooth. 2 of them are kind of close to a sawtooth. And
Yeah.
actually, the way I made for the Darude Sandstorm, the other synth lead, the dum 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 dum. No, not. Yeah, that one. Anyway, that one is made with actually 2 operators in parallel. One of them using what he's going to talk about in a second to make a sawtooth. The other using one of the fake sawtooths, and with a little bit
the
of
pseudo
detuning.
saws, if you will.
So the real sawtooth.
Well, this is not a real sawtooth either, but the thing is on the Genesis, you don't even have that pseudo saw, so you need to start worrying about creating one somehow. And the easiest way to do that is to create this sound, which is very much siney, and then you need to turn on that feedback twist. And I'm going to make it so you can see the sound output up here. And as we start turning up the feedback, it doesn't sound like anything's happening, and then you end up with something that is extremely close to, or closer than a pseudo saw, and sounds like I farted. Are the next panelists here yet, by the way? You guys can come up and start setting up. We're just wasting time because we didn't know you were here.
Yeah. What's the next panel after this? Is everybody here from? Cool. Yeah. Let's just take out because it's going to take a while for him to get the sense down anyway.
Yep.
But
Thank you, everybody.
Panelists. Raise their hand. I'm going to play one more track using that sawtooth wave, and also a cool techno effect while we break down, because my laptop I can just yank. That's the other effect I'm proud of. That song loops forever if I don't stop it.